Welcome to Brain Upgrade. Every decision you make, every relationship you build, and every opportunity you gain is shaped by one thing: how well you understand human nature. Most people spend their lives learning facts. Very few learn the hidden rules that govern behavior, influence, and power. In today's video, you'll discover 8 ruthless lessons inspired by Machiavelli that can fundamentally change the way you think, act, and make decisions. Watch until the end, because the final lesson may completely reshape how you see yourself and everyone around you. Let's begin. Most people believe they know someone after enough conversations. They think character is revealed through promises, good intentions, or shared values. But if you look closely at how human behavior actually works, you'll notice something much more reliable. People don't reveal who they are when conditions are comfortable. They reveal who they are when the environment becomes demanding. Pressure has a unique ability to remove the layers of social performance that people consciously or unconsciously build around themselves. It's like increasing the weight in a strength exercise. Under a light load, almost anyone can maintain good form. Under a heavy load, weaknesses become impossible to hide. Your brain is constantly trying to predict the behavior of the people around you. This predictive process is essential for survival. Every interaction creates a mental model. You estimate whether someone is dependable, honest, cooperative, or trustworthy based on repeated experiences. The problem is that those predictions are often built during stable conditions, where the stakes are low. In those environments, most people behave similarly because there is little to lose. The real information emerges when uncertainty enters the picture. Think about what happens during a financial crisis, a conflict at work, an unexpected setback, or a situation where someone's reputation is at risk. Suddenly, priorities become visible. The person who claimed to value teamwork may begin protecting only themselves. Someone who constantly spoke about loyalty may disappear when helping becomes inconvenient. Another individual who rarely sought recognition may quietly become the most dependable person in the room. These differences are not random. Pressure reorganizes behavior around what the brain considers most important. One of the remarkable features of the nervous system is that it constantly evaluates threats. When the brain detects uncertainty, it shifts resources toward immediate survival. Attention narrows. Long-term thinking becomes less dominant. Emotional reactions become stronger. This is not necessarily a flaw. It's an adaptation that helped humans survive unpredictable environments. But it also means that under stress, people stop acting according to what sounds admirable and start acting according to what they truly prioritize. That's why words alone are poor predictors of future behavior. Almost everyone knows the right things to say. People understand the language of honesty, discipline, respect, and commitment. But language is inexpensive. Behavior carries a cost. When someone keeps their promises despite inconvenience, they're paying that cost. When someone supports others despite personal risk, they're revealing a value system that extends beyond self-interest. This is why careful observation matters more than quick judgment. Instead of asking whether someone seems trustworthy, ask yourself a different question. What do they consistently do when the situation becomes difficult? Do they remain calm when everyone else becomes reactive? Do they accept responsibility when mistakes occur? Or do they immediately search for someone else to blame? Do they continue showing integrity when no reward is guaranteed? Patterns answer these questions far better than isolated events. The human brain is naturally attracted to dramatic moments. We remember one inspiring speech, one generous action, or one emotional apology, but real intelligence comes from paying attention to repetition rather than intensity. A single act can be performed for appearance. Consistent behavior over months or years is much harder to fake. There's another reason this matters. Stress doesn't only reveal other people, it reveals you. Most individuals spend a great deal of time evaluating everyone around them while rarely examining their own responses under pressure. Yet the same principles apply internally. How do you behave when plans collapse? What happens when you're criticized unfairly? Do you become impulsive, defensive, withdrawn, or do you maintain enough psychological distance to make deliberate decisions instead of emotional ones? Self-awareness begins exactly where comfort ends. If you want to understand your own priorities, don't examine your goals during your best days. Observe yourself during your hardest ones. Notice where your attention goes. Notice what habits disappear first. Notice which principles remain non-negotiable and which ones vanish the moment life becomes inconvenient. Over time, you'll realize something incredibly valuable. Pressure is not merely an obstacle to avoid. It's information. It provides data that ordinary circumstances cannot. It exposes strengths that were previously invisible and weaknesses that require attention. Instead of fearing difficult situations, you can begin viewing them as accurate feedback about yourself and about the people you choose to trust. The individuals who become exceptionally effective at navigating life are rarely the ones with perfect instincts. They're the ones who collect evidence patiently. They resist forming conclusions based on charisma, confidence, or impressive words. They wait for patterns. They observe decisions made under uncertainty. They recognize that consistency during adversity carries far more predictive value than confidence during comfort. Once you begin seeing people through this lens, your judgment becomes clearer. You stop being surprised by behavior that was quietly present all along. You make better decisions about partnerships, friendships, leadership, and trust. And perhaps most importantly, you begin developing the kind of character that remains stable regardless of circumstances, because true strength isn't measured by how you perform when everything goes according to plan. It's measured by who you become when nothing does. Every interaction you have with another human being is shaped long before the first word is spoken. The brain is constantly reading emotional signals from the environment, often outside of conscious awareness. Facial expressions, posture, breathing patterns, tone of voice, eye contact, and even the pace of movement all provide information that your nervous system uses to answer one fundamental question: is this situation safe, uncertain, or threatening? What's remarkable is that this process happens in fractions of a second, before logic has a chance to fully engage. This explains why emotions spread so quickly through groups of people. You walk into a room where everyone is anxious, and without anyone saying a word, your own heart rate may begin to increase. Your attention becomes narrower. You start scanning for potential problems. On the other hand, if you enter an environment where someone remains calm, focused, and composed despite a challenging situation, your nervous system begins adjusting in that direction as well. Human beings are deeply social organisms. Our brains evolved not only to think independently, but also to synchronize with the emotional states of those around us. This phenomenon is incredibly useful for survival. Imagine early human communities facing danger. If one person noticed a threat and immediately became alert, that heightened state needed to spread rapidly throughout the group. Waiting for a detailed explanation could have been fatal. The nervous system became exceptionally efficient at detecting emotion because emotion often carried information that words could not communicate fast enough. The same biological mechanism still operates today, but the threats have changed. Instead of predators, people face deadlines, negotiations, competition, uncertainty, financial pressure, and interpersonal conflict. Although the context is different, the brain responds in surprisingly similar ways. Elevated stress hormones prepare the body for action. Attention becomes selective. Emotional reactions become stronger. Decision-making becomes faster but often less flexible. Now consider what happens if you become emotionally reactive every time external circumstances shift. Every unexpected email changes your mood. Every criticism disrupts your focus. Every disagreement pulls your attention away from your long-term objectives. Without realizing it, you've allowed the environment to determine your internal state. In other words, you've surrendered control over one of your most valuable biological resources, your attention. Attention is limited. The brain cannot process everything at once. Every emotional reaction consumes cognitive resources that could otherwise be used for planning, learning, creativity, or solving problems. This is why maintaining emotional regulation is not simply about appearing composed. It's about preserving mental bandwidth for the decisions that actually matter. One of the clearest differences between highly effective individuals and everyone else is not intelligence alone. It's the speed with which they recover from emotional disruption. They still experience frustration, disappointment, fear, and uncertainty. Those emotions are part of being human. The difference is that they recognize these states without allowing them to dictate every action. There's a gap between feeling something and acting on it. Expanding that gap is one of the most powerful skills you can develop. Think about difficult conversations. When another person becomes defensive, the natural tendency is to mirror that behavior. Voices become louder, body language becomes more rigid. The conversation shifts away from solving the problem and toward protecting identity. Both nervous systems begin amplifying each other until neither individual is thinking clearly anymore. Now imagine the opposite. One person deliberately slows their breathing. Their voice remains steady. Their posture stays relaxed. They continue listening instead of interrupting. Something interesting begins to happen. The emotional intensity often decreases because the nervous system is no longer receiving signals that reinforce danger. Calmness becomes just as contagious as anxiety. This doesn't mean remaining passive or suppressing emotions. Suppression often creates additional stress because the emotional response is still occurring beneath the surface. Regulation is different. Regulation means acknowledging what you're experiencing while preventing that temporary state from controlling your next decision. It allows the rational systems of the brain to stay engaged even when emotions are present. There's another important principle worth understanding. Emotional predictability creates vulnerability. If people know exactly what triggers you, they can influence your behavior with surprising ease. Someone who knows you react immediately to criticism can provoke you into making impulsive decisions. Someone who understands your fear of rejection can manipulate your choices without using force. The less control you have over your emotional responses, the easier it becomes for external events to shape your actions. This is why developing emotional stability isn't just beneficial for your personal well-being. It's a strategic advantage. When your reactions become less predictable, your decisions become more intentional. You stop operating on automatic patterns and begin choosing responses that align with your long-term goals rather than temporary feelings. Observe individuals who consistently perform well in demanding environments. Emergency physicians, experienced negotiators, elite military operators, exceptional entrepreneurs, and high-level leaders often share one common characteristic. They don't waste energy reacting to every variable they cannot control. Instead, they focus intensely on the variables they can influence. Their breathing, attention, preparation, communication, and decision-making remain remarkably consistent even when circumstances become chaotic. This consistency creates trust. People naturally look toward individuals whose nervous systems remain stable during uncertainty. Confidence is rarely communicated through dramatic speeches or exaggerated displays of authority. More often, it's communicated through steady behavior when everyone else becomes emotionally overwhelmed. Over time, this changes how others perceive you. Instead of becoming known as someone who reacts to every challenge, you become recognized as someone who thinks before acting, listens before speaking, and responds with clarity rather than impulse. That reputation compounds over months and years. It shapes opportunities, relationships, leadership, and influence in ways that often go unnoticed until you look back and realize that your greatest advantage was never controlling other people. It was learning to control the only system you truly possess, your own mind and nervous system. One of the most common mistakes people make is believing that reality alone determines outcomes. In an ideal world, facts would always speak for themselves. Skill would automatically be recognized. Integrity would always be rewarded. Hard work would never go unnoticed. But when you observe human behavior closely, you realize something much more complex is happening. Before people evaluate reality, they evaluate their perception of reality, and that distinction changes everything. The brain is fundamentally a prediction machine. It doesn't wait for complete information before making judgments. Instead, it continuously builds models based on limited evidence, previous experiences, and rapid sensory input. This process is incredibly efficient because it allows us to navigate the world quickly. If the brain analyzed every detail from scratch, even simple decisions would become overwhelming. The trade-off, however, is that first impressions often become mental shortcuts that influence everything that follows. Within seconds of meeting someone, your nervous system has already begun forming expectations. It notices posture, facial expression, eye contact, tone of voice, movement, confidence, and consistency. None of these signals provide the full picture of a person's character, but the brain uses them anyway because it evolved to make fast predictions under uncertainty. Once those predictions are formed, they become surprisingly resistant to change. This explains why perception carries so much influence. It isn't because appearances are more important than reality, it's because perception determines whether people remain engaged long enough to discover reality. If someone immediately appears unreliable, uncertain, or inconsistent, others may never stay long enough to recognize their actual competence. Conversely, someone who projects confidence and stability often receives opportunities that allow their true abilities to become visible. This doesn't suggest pretending to be someone you're not. Authenticity remains essential, but authenticity without awareness can become ineffective. There is a difference between being genuine and being careless about the signals you send. Every action communicates something. Every habit contributes to a reputation. Every repeated behavior teaches others what they can expect from you. Reputation is one of the most powerful forms of leverage because it operates even when you aren't present. Long before you enter a room, people often carry expectations built from previous interactions, conversations, or observations. Those expectations influence how they interpret everything you do next. If your reputation is one of reliability, people naturally give you the benefit of the doubt during difficult situations. If your reputation is inconsistency, even your strongest efforts may be questioned. What's fascinating is that the brain actively searches for evidence that confirms its existing beliefs. Once someone forms an impression, they unconsciously notice information that supports it while overlooking information that contradicts it. This isn't necessarily intentional, it's simply how predictive systems become more efficient. But it means that changing someone's perception requires more than one impressive moment. It requires repeated evidence delivered consistently over time. Consistency is where trust begins. Many individuals focus intensely on producing occasional extraordinary performances while neglecting everyday reliability. Yet the nervous system values predictability. Knowing what to expect from someone reduces uncertainty, and reducing uncertainty creates psychological safety. When people consistently observe honesty, discipline, emotional stability, and competence. Those qualities gradually become associated with your identity, rather than isolated actions. This principle applies equally to communication. The words you choose matter, but the way you deliver them often carries greater weight. A calm voice during disagreement communicates confidence. Careful listening communicates respect. Direct answers communicate clarity. Constant exaggeration, emotional volatility, or unnecessary defensiveness create signals that the brain interprets as instability regardless of the facts being presented. Consider how often people attempt to persuade others by adding more words. They explain repeatedly, justify every decision, and defend themselves against every criticism. Ironically, excessive explanation often weakens perception rather than strengthening it. The brain interprets confidence differently. Individuals who understand their position rarely feel compelled to prove every detail immediately. They allow evidence, consistency, and time to reinforce credibility. Silence also carries information. Pausing before responding demonstrates that your nervous system is evaluating rather than reacting. It signals thoughtfulness instead of impulsivity. In many situations, the ability to remain composed says more than the ability to speak continuously. There's another important element that often goes unnoticed. People don't simply evaluate what you achieve. They evaluate whether your behavior aligns with your stated values. Inconsistency creates cognitive conflict. If someone repeatedly speaks about discipline but consistently arrives late, the brain pays greater attention to the behavior than the statement. Actions carry higher predictive value because they require actual commitment rather than intention. This is why small habits become surprisingly significant. Showing up prepared, keeping promises, finishing what you begin, treating people with the same respect regardless of status, remaining emotionally stable during setbacks. Individually, these behaviors seem ordinary. Collectively, they construct an identity that becomes difficult to question. Over time, reputation compounds in much the same way that repeated training strengthens neural pathways. Every consistent action reinforces expectations. Every fulfilled commitment increases trust. Every calm response during adversity strengthens credibility. Eventually, your presence alone begins communicating qualities that previously required explanation. The opposite is equally true. Inconsistency compounds as well. Broken commitments, emotional unpredictability, exaggerated claims, and unreliable behavior gradually shape a perception that becomes increasingly difficult to reverse. No single event usually creates that outcome. It emerges from repeated patterns that the brain quietly records over months and years. The individuals who navigate life most effectively understand that perception is not something to manipulate, it is something to manage through disciplined behavior. They recognize that lasting influence cannot be built on performance alone. It must be supported by genuine competence, emotional stability, and consistent action. When these elements align, perception and reality stop competing with one another. Instead, they reinforce each other. At that point, people no longer trust you because of what you say. They trust you because your behavior has become predictable in the best possible way. They know what to expect. They know your standards remain stable regardless of circumstances. And in a world where uncertainty dominates so many decisions, that kind of consistency becomes one of the rarest and most valuable forms of intelligence a person can possess. One of the greatest advantages you can develop is not speaking more. It is seeing more. Most people enter conversations with a single objective: to express themselves. They prepare arguments, rehearse opinions, and search for the right moment to speak. But in doing so, they overlook something far more valuable than being heard. They miss the information that other people reveal every minute without realizing it. The human brain is constantly communicating priorities, not only through words, but through patterns. What someone repeatedly talks about, what they avoid discussing, where their attention goes during moments of uncertainty, how they respond when challenged, and even what causes them to become emotionally reactive. These signals are often more accurate than direct answers because they emerge naturally rather than being carefully constructed. One of the remarkable characteristics of the nervous system is that attention follows importance. Whatever the brain considers most relevant tends to appear repeatedly in speech, behavior, and decision-making. If someone consistently returns to the same concerns, ambitions, frustrations, or fears, they are revealing the internal framework through which they interpret the world. This isn't manipulation, it's observation. And observation is one of the most underdeveloped skills in modern life. Think about how conversations usually unfold. While another person is speaking, many individuals are not actually listening. They are preparing their next response. Their attention shifts inward. They evaluate whether they agree or disagree. They search for a personal story that relates. They interrupt with advice before fully understanding the situation. As a result, they leave the conversation believing they communicated effectively while missing the most valuable information available. True listening requires something different. It requires temporarily suspending the need to prove your intelligence. That creates space for curiosity. Instead of asking, "What should I say next?" ask, "What is this person consistently revealing?" This small shift transforms the quality of information you receive. Patterns begin to emerge. Some people repeatedly describe themselves as victims, regardless of the situation. Others consistently take responsibility, even when circumstances are difficult. Some individuals focus primarily on opportunities. Others notice only obstacles. These recurring themes are not random. They reflect deeply established neural pathways that influence future decisions. The brain favors efficiency. It builds habits not only in physical actions, but also in thinking. The more often someone interprets events through a particular lens, the stronger that mental pathway becomes. Over time, their reactions become increasingly predictable. This predictability provides valuable insight, not for judging people, but for understanding how they are likely to respond under future circumstances. The same principle applies during negotiations, leadership, friendships, and professional relationships. The individual who gathers the most accurate information often makes the best decisions, not because they are more persuasive, but because they understand reality more clearly. Every thoughtful question becomes an opportunity to collect data rather than simply confirm existing beliefs. There's another important aspect to observation. It extends beyond language. Body posture, eye movements, breathing patterns, and vocal rhythm frequently change before conscious thought catches up. When people become uncertain, their speech may slow down or become unusually fast. When discussing subjects that genuinely matter to them, their energy often changes automatically. The nervous system reveals significance through subtle physiological shifts long before a carefully prepared sentence does. This doesn't mean interpreting every movement or searching for hidden meanings in every gesture. Human behavior is too complex for simplistic conclusions. Instead, focus on repeated consistency. One isolated behavior rarely provides reliable information. Multiple observations across different situations create patterns that become increasingly trustworthy. Patience is essential here. Many people rush towards certainty because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. They make quick assumptions about others after one interaction. The brain enjoys certainty because it reduces cognitive effort, but intelligence often requires resisting that impulse. Remaining curious longer than everyone else allows more evidence to accumulate before reaching conclusions. This approach also changes the quality of your own communication. When people feel genuinely heard, they become more willing to share meaningful information. Their nervous system gradually shifts away from defensiveness and toward cooperation. Psychological safety increases. Conversations become deeper, more productive, and significantly more honest. Notice that the most respected leaders often ask thoughtful questions before offering solutions. They recognize that solving the wrong problem efficiently still produces poor outcomes. Careful observation ensures that action is directed toward reality rather than assumption. Another interesting effect occurs when you become comfortable with silence. Silence often feels uncomfortable because the brain naturally seeks closure. Most individuals rush to fill empty space with additional words. But if you remain patient, something remarkable frequently happens. The other person continues speaking. They elaborate, they clarify. They often reveal information they had not originally intended to share simply because the conversation was given room to breathe. Silence, therefore, becomes an instrument of understanding rather than awkwardness. The quality of your decisions depends directly on the quality of the information you collect. If your observations are incomplete, your conclusions will be incomplete as well. If your attention is distracted, your judgment becomes vulnerable to assumptions. But when you consistently gather accurate information before reacting, you begin making decisions that appear intuitive to others, even though they are built upon careful observation rather than instinct alone. This principle applies equally to self-awareness. Observe your own thoughts with the same curiosity you apply to others. Notice which situations consistently trigger emotional reactions. Identify recurring mental patterns. Pay attention to habits that emerge under stress. Your own nervous system is providing continuous feedback if you're willing to notice it. Over time, observation becomes less of a technique and more of a way of thinking. You stop reacting to isolated events and begin recognizing long-term patterns. You become less influenced by appearances and more interested in consistency. Instead of chasing quick answers, you develop the patience to understand deeper causes. And in a world where most people are competing to be the loudest voice in the room, the individual who quietly collects the most accurate information often becomes the one making the smartest decisions. The greatest advantage you can ever develop isn't more knowledge, it's clearer perception. When you understand people without becoming controlled by them and master yourself before trying to master the world, you become exceptionally difficult to manipulate and extraordinarily capable of making better decisions. Thanks for watching. If you found value in this video, subscribe to Brain Upgrade, leave a comment with the lesson that impacted you the most, and share this video with someone who wants to think more clearly and live more intentionally. Until next time, keep upgrading your mind.